I'm S.A. Baz Collins here for this week's Written on the Edge Season 10, Episode 41 interview. We'll be getting to know author Frank Pizzoli better and talking about their recent release, Passionate Outlier. So let's welcome our guest. Frank Pizzoli is a writer, editor, and producer. His work has appeared in Lambda Book Report, White Crane Review, Instinct Pause, Rivendell's Q Syndicate, and Press Pass Q, HIV Plus, AlterNet Syndication, Positively Aware, Body Positive, New York Blade News, and Washington Blade. He is the publisher and editor of Central Voice newspaper and founder of the nonprofit Positive Opportunities, Inc., a Points of Light Foundation Award winner of 2001. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today.
So that's quite the bio, and little birdies in the garden have told me that you've been quite the busy bee in your life in, actually not only writing about what we're going to talk about here, but also that, you've interviewed some of the biggies in our business of queer media. So why don't you tell us how you got started on your creative path? How did all of this happen to lead us to what we're talking about today?
Well, when I reflected on your question, it's interesting. I have come from an arts-loving family,
Mm-hmm.
a book-loving family.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had a bookcase in their bedroom. We had a huge bookcase in the children's rooms upstairs where we slept up in the attic. And giving a book for a special occasion was always something that was done, and it was special, and it was put out on the coffee table, passed around between relatives, so that it was a surprise and kind of a feather in your cap if you found a good book.
Gotcha. So what led you to doing what you've done for most of your career? I mean, having a love of the arts and having a love of that as from a young age. I get it. My mom was like that. She used to take us kids to symphonies and all kinds of things when we were very young, and a lot of people would always compliment her that her kids were so well behaved for things that were generally seen as adult kind of consumption of media and such. So, what led you to do what you're doing and what you're writing about now?
Well, it actually started very early. In the introduction, I do bring you into the story. I'm about 10 years old, and a couple of buddies and I decide we're going to start a newspaper, quote unquote, big
Right,
idea.
right, right.
And
Cue Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. No.
yeah. I mean, it was, and it was called the Daily Blab, although it was anything but daily. And I'll paint a picture with words.
Uh-huh.
Where I grew up in the anthracite coal region in Pennsylvania, which is quite a large geographic area in the state itself. But it was two streets, 1 mile long, a highway, a street, an alley, a street, an alley, and a row of coal breakers. 1 mile long, that was the whole show. Now my mother was involved with the local library group and presented with the group of women of the area's first library. So of course, my sister and I were always part of that. And we'd go to Encyclopedia Britannica, we'd pick out some interesting factoid, we'd write it down, and then we would go and put them out. We had 3 paid subscribers. We paid a nickel for a stack of typewriter paper that we would write on. And he'd put them, my uncle was a grocer, he'd put them out on his counter. And so we were, of course, lurking around to see who picked them up and who took them home. And that's actually how I got started. And it's been fun ever since. Went on with editing the college newspaper. And the 2 things that I have done in my life consistently, one way or another, is work in human services or journalism, freelance journalism or full-time in journalism. I've been editor of publications, started one of my own. The point being, in human services, you have to find out as much as you can, and you can't tell anybody, but it has to be correct. And in journalism, you find out as much as you can, and you try to tell everybody. So right after college, I realized that I would have 2 sort of steering wheels to work on in terms of a career. And some of it I could get out to the public, and some of it I dare not, because that would be against the law and that would violate confidentialities. So I've always sort of tooled it between the two, and been lucky with it.
Well, that's all also a good mark of journalism that I think, sadly, it's kind of a complicated and a sticky wicket at that of, journalism today. We've, I think we've lost the thread and the plot on journalism as it is originally has been intended to be used. I think we've circled back after the pandemic. We've circled back. We're 100 years ago, back with the robber barons, the yellow journalism, all of this stuff is cycled back around. So I think, while I certainly commend you for the work that you've done, and many people like you, which I'm assuming is it's part of the thread of your book here, but I find it, do you find it as disheartening to see so many of our institutions and the foundations and bedrock of our journalistic community is not quite meeting the bar? Or the bar has been so lowered that we're like struggling to get real factual information out?
It is a struggle, and I some moments feel like we live in the age of dumb,
Hmm.
just because and when you say things like that, no, I'm not trying to poke in the eye people that are different than you and I, or people that may disagree.
Right.
What I find as I'm 74 years old, and when I started this, we were reading at the eighth grade level, somewhere between the seventh and eighth grade level. And now it's below the fifth grade level. That's not a good sign.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
I find that I have to be very careful and explain to people what the enterprise is. And I will say, Baz, I'm going to speak to you. I will prepare questions. I would encourage you to prepare questions or ideas that you want to talk about. I have no vested interest in what your answers are. My role is to ask questions and, with your assistance, refine those questions. And then we do the wonderful exercise of letting the reader decide where they stand on the issue. We don't shoot messengers, we give everybody full play and full voice. And that's what it is. And it's amazing because I think people will early on, sometimes, depending on the story you're doing and the type of other headlines that it's getting, is this guy on my side or on the other side? And I
Hmm.
handle myself such that there are no sides when I do journalism. There's your story. There are people who are affected by your story. There's their story about your story. And then the big final story is, what do the readers think about it all? So if
Right.
they think you're the greatest thing since computer software, good for you. If they think you're not so hot, that is a reflection of how they viewed your answers.
Yeah, exactly. And as an author myself, I write about perceptions because it's one of the things that we have in our lives and we use all the time, and yet we never really give them their due. And we also fail to acknowledge that our perceptions can be wrong. And I think that a lot of the misinformation, disinformation, the malfeasance, and malignant ways that some of this alternative facts that the right has come up with, I mean, we're living in a Russian propaganda era, and I don't think many Americans know that this is the Russian playbook. And part of, and I will get to your book, I promise, but I just kind of wanted to get your feelings because the journalistic integrity is such a question in not only the YouTube independent media space, but also corporate media. You now have to worry about who owns the news organization, what's their slant, you have all these things to consider. We don't have the days of Walter Cronkite just stating the facts and moving on to the next story. Um, and so I kind of wanted to get your feel because it seems like you have been 10 toes deep in this for quite some time, and I know you have seen over the length of your career that kind of variance that has happened from the good old days when we had, Harry Reasoner and all the biggies of the past. to what we have now, where the media landscape is so diverse, which can be a good thing, but it also brings in bad faith actors. Don't you think?
It does. And when I look back at, you mentioned changes over a period of time. Rupert Murdoch at one point owned the Village Voice. Imagine that.
Mm, I didn't
Who
know that.
I
That's interesting.
certainly would not have been writing for, in the years that he did. But now I don't mean to put words in the good man's mouth, but what he basically said when asked, why would you own that and let it do everything that it's doing? And he basically said, well, my first job is to make money, and it's making a lot of money. And I never disturb things that make money. So for right now, I can live with the way they make money. Okay, and it used to be, yeah, General Electric owned the planet, so to speak. And underneath it, they realized there were varying demographics, and they realized that we have to parlay with all of them because there's a pile of money in each one, and at the end of the day, it's all ours and not theirs. And whatever it is, we have to program to feed them regularly. That's what we're going to do, and we're going to go home and count the money. That formula has changed, and that's, I think, what you're referring to there very cogently and very, very urgently, is that when that model changes, that's one of the interviews I did for the Village Voice was Ira Glasser, who founded the ACLU. He went out there to Chicago before they were even a national organization. And I still hear in ringing in my ear his voice, do you really want the government deciding all of that?
Mm,
So we all better get used to hearing a lot of stuff we don't like or agree with, or
right.
we're going to really, really not like what happens
Yeah.
next.
And I think that I'm the generation right after you. Um, I'm the beginning of Gen X, and I think our generations were the last to straddle the analog years and the digital years. And so we have a long history of we knew the before time, what it was like when you had to do research and you had to go to the library and you had to use the card catalog and you had, all of the things we would do that, doesn't sit and exist on a smart device. And I say that quote unquote because that's why a lot of people have chosen to be dumb, because they carry around their brain in a phone. But and I'm going to take it. Let's actually get to your book here. So, Passionate Outlier is a book about people within the community that really were the movers and shakers. Am I wrong in that assumption?
No, that's exactly what it is. And let me unpack that for you and explain to our
Please.
audience how the publisher and how I arrived there. The book itself is 20 interviews, some reviews, all written by me for 4 different publications around the country.
Okay.
And they were published from 2007 to 2019. And as people issued new books, new plays, they had events in their life that were headline worthy, I would connect with them. A great relationship with the major publishers. Um, and would do a story on this is what you're up to this week, so to speak. But now let's go backwards in your career and let's look a little forward in your career. And let me ask you what you think about some important things that I think our readers would like to know what your thoughts are. So I was able to use the classic journalistic hook. That's the new event, but now I want to really deepen what we're talking about. And that's where people really opened up. I I used as my guiding post after I did a couple of them. I realized what I was doing in the structure is we used to say, or we still do say, write the book you want to read.
Mm,
Don't worry necessarily
mm-hmm.
um, about. And I said, do the interview you want to do, Frank. Ask the questions you want to answer to. In the
Mm-hmm.
process, that will work. And I can assure the listening audience that yeah, that works just as well for interviews and reviews too. Um, we don't mean to cut the reader out. That's not my suggestion at the writer. I'm not trying to say I don't care what the reader thinks, but because I'm going to do it from my point of view, you actually give better service to the reader in
Right.
the end because you're picking up a lot of what they may anticipate or they may want.
So why the title Passionate Outlier? You want to explain to the audience how you arrived at that title in particular? I'm having a feeling, or at least it's my impression, that it's because, we're not necessarily mainstream and yet we affect the mainstream at large. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, Christopher Graham, who I touched, he wrote the afterword, and he's also interviewed on his book Eminent Outlaws, and it's a phrase that came from his afterword.
Oh,
That a passionate outlier. I'm paging through right now, and I had to actually email and call him and say, I can't believe you're talking about me. Thank you. And I do mean that and he was very gracious. He said that I even corrected points in his literary history, and he thought that this book was a good companion piece to his Eminent Outlaws. And I couldn't believe
that's
that.
wonderful. That's
You say
wonderful.
that, and that I am basically a passionate outlier, likes people who came, like you, like people who came before us. I have been trying to get in touch with Winston Leyland, the editor and I cannot prompt any contact from him. Those are the Gay Sunshine reviews, Fag Rag, Christopher Street. It goes back to that tradition where you were
Hmm.
doing news reporting, but you were also doing what we used to call reportage, meaning, more than a particular event-driven story or a school board meeting with a date and a time. It was more news feature, and that really came through.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the things that I'm glad that you've put this out because it's almost like the Gen Alpha and Gen Z generations, they've only known what we've accomplished from the aughts on. That's all they know. That's been their whole experience. And unfortunately, for a good portion of them, Trump has been their president. And I think that one of the things that really kind of astounds me is how little in as far as my consumption of media, and I consume far and wide. I don't just consume American media. I want to know what my queer brothers and sisters are doing in Africa. I want to know what they're doing over in Southeast Asia. So I'm constantly polling, and in fact, it's kind of sad that that I'm of an age that I actually know all of these organizations you work for because I've consumed them at one point or another in my life. And but the importance of our history, and that's one of the reasons why Vance and I do this podcast, because our whole thrust has been we want to be a repository of these queer voices and our allies who write for the community, that we wanted to make sure that there's some place where we're collecting that stuff digitally and journalizing it over time, that we hear these voices and we keep them because we're under threat again. Here we are back, Reagan 2.0, we're in that oppressive era again. Don't you think?
Oh, I definitely think we are. In fact, I've been speaking. I was in Milford, PA for a Readers Writers Festival. I'm going to Penn State University next week, and I know that I will be explaining. Um, we started to destroy the educational system under Ronald Reagan, and now we're, as you say, Reagan 2.0, and it's continued. I saw that firsthand. I did a short stint of not quite 3 years as a adjunct instructor at a local 2-year institution. And I taught the composition, sociology, philosophy, all of the sort of humanities courses, the softer courses. It was a business oriented institution. And I would say you had to write 500 words. And this was in the late 90s. Okay. So, just for perspective's sake, what we face today just didn't get a start with Donald Trump coming to office. There's
Mm-hmm.
been something afoot for a long time. And I would say, I need you to write 500 words. And they would practically fall on the floor. And then I didn't say 5,000, I
Right.
said
Yeah.
500 words. And if you wrote down what I just said, it's getting you near the goal of 500
Right.
words.
Exactly.
You wanted to, and they would say, well, I don't know what to write about. And I would say, well, write about something you recently read. And they would say, I don't read. I would privately, in my cartoon bubble, say, why aren't you embarrassed to say that out loud
Right,
in your
exactly.
institution of higher education in front of the instructor and your peers? You're using somebody's money, your own, a grant, your parents, some combination thereof, and you're an adult now. Why is that okay with you? If and when they would go on, guffaw on, I would say, well, go to the library and pick out something. I don't go to the library. And then when I would try to stimulate something, I would put ideas on the board, and they would say, where did you get that? And if they didn't like the source, that was alarming to me back then, because then I dug around and I realized that that institution, and there were many, many like it, not to single them out, were basically recruiting from homeschool-based families
Hmm.
and churches. So by the time they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 20 something, their mind is perfectly sealed
Right,
to
right.
not have any new evidence ever come in. And if they didn't like the source, that was just, you just change the outcome. Because if I want 2 + 2 to equal 5, it's going to equal 5.
Right, right. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your interviewing some of the giants in our queer history, and what was it like to actually figure out how you would approach their works through them to get them to talk about them that was revelatory that maybe other people hadn't thought about at the time.
Yes, what I found is an interesting area of questioning, and it did, as you suggest, open them up to, and almost you could hear it in their tone of voice. Oh, I'm so glad he's interested in this. People who were doing the kind of writing that we were doing about the topics that we were doing, you weren't always well accepted. You were taking a risk. For goodness sake, to raise your hand and say, I want to be a writer to begin with, no matter what the topic is. I mean, that's why Dorothy Parker said, first thing you do is you get him E.B. White's Elements of Style, and then you shoot him. It's been attributed to, a couple of different people, and people would say, wow, that's really interesting. That's difficult. And I would say, they can be, like Marianne Moore replied to the gentleman who said, your poems are difficult to read. And she said, well, they're difficult to write. And that too, that's John Asbury, that's been attributed around as one of those apocryphal. But the point being is you want to dig into it, you want to unravel it, and you want to say, what else was going on in your life when you were doing this? Here, think about this. There we are. We have the three surviving members of the Violet Quill.
Hmm.
Two of whom are not with us today, as the book came out. Okay, Edmund White, Andrew Holleran, and Felice Picano. So, of course, Felice Picano, about 3 weeks before the book was to be pre-released, left us, and then Ed in June on June 3rd. The official release date was February. So by the time the book was out and about town, two of those three people were no longer with us. And when Holleran told this to me on the phone, and then it should be in there in one of the other interviews. There he is. He has Dancer from the Dance.
Hmm.
He's sitting across the desk from someone like you, and they're going to ink the contract. Okay, it's all ready to go. Last best final offer. Here we go. Sign. And everybody goes to town on the book. And he's sitting there and he realizes, oh my goodness, if I do this under my name, Eric Garber, my parents are going to know I'm gay. So here's the guy who wrote a book that some couple of consecutive generations, couldn't get enough of.
Hmm.
And he's worried his parents
I
are going to
myself
know he's
read it.
gay.
Yeah.
So the guy says, oh, I can't believe we're at this point in the negotiations. We're going to do this. You have till the end of the day to come back with a name or the deal's off. Okay. I can't believe you. Why would you do this? That kind of, so he goes back to the end of the day and it was Andrew Holleran. That's the name. And I always thought, now, isn't that amazing from afar to have concluded that the dancer is anything but the dancer from the dance?
I love
No,
the
and and
no,
then
it's great.
you talked to Ed White, and he said, I said, okay, just give me the bottom line here. What was the Violet Quill? And he said, oh well, it's been talked about this way, that way, this way, that way. He said, we got together 7, 8 times. None of us can really remember it. we used to call it, the tea and cake, and we'd talk about what we were writing, and we'd read little passages to each other. He said, but eventually what we did, he said, here's the importance of it. We divided up the market. Okay, you get Fire Island, I get this. I won't write about your stuff. You don't write about mine. Felice and he exchanged. Could I have that title for my book? But if you take it off of yours, and that kind of writerly stuff, back and forth. How'd you make this deal? How'd you make that deal? And then when I got that from them, so to speak, imagine there's four of us. I have somebody, a technician who's dealing with recording it, because I don't want to be bothered with pushing any buttons.
Right.
Just enjoy the conversation. And Ed says, well, this is what writers talk about when they get together. We had to divide it up. He said, but what's really important about it is we all started to write and not explain ourselves. We were no longer writing stories or novels with gay characters in relationship to everybody and everything else. So we're gay. We didn't say how we got to be gay. We didn't say whether it was good or bad. If this is who we are, this is how we live, this is who we're living with, and what we're going to do. And he said that was very freeing. And at the same time, the publishing houses were saying, maybe we can make some sales here, maybe we can go. And that sort of opened up after Stonewall, 69 to, and then fueled by the tragedy of the AIDS crisis,
right?
Because so much of what they wrote about was about that time and those milieus and the whole landscape of queer at that point.
Yeah, and it's, I read all of those authors' works. It's just those I had two authors predominantly that were like from that era, and they weren't part of the Violet Quill gang, but and in fact, for a while I did a short little blog website called the Violet Quill Redux, because I was so inspired by the work that the authors that came before me who were queer. I was inspired by their voices being now put down on paper for posterity kind of purposes. But I've always had two authors that I absolutely loved. One was John Ritchie, and the other one was Gordon Merrick. And you have to understand, this is a queer teen boy in the 70s, going into the 80s. And so I had,
well, and the Lord didn't mind.
Yeah, I had Gordon Merrick for my heart.
That
was my romance, portion of it. And then I had John Ritchie for my lust. So I had two authors that I cleaved to, that I totally loved.
That's a great way to describe that, because I had a very similar experience, and I would look at The Lord Won't Mind with Gunsbook, and I would go, oh, can you get to it already? What do you got? This is so ecclesiastical, churchy. It's all layered, and it's
flowery.
Let's take off the church vestments already. Does anybody around here have a good feeling ever about anything? And then he would sneak in those real hotsy-totsy scenes, and it would sort of sate you for a while till you got through another chapter or two or three, until somebody actually looked at somebody's rear end, and had a reaction to it. And then you get Ed White, I'm speaking Ed White's last book, which was about his sexual escapades. I officially declared him a fabulist. I was sitting in New Orleans at Saints and Sinners. We were launching the book, and right about that time, I said, "Thank you, Edmund White, for publishing a book right now at this point in time that underscores and confirms every negative stereotype any of our enemies ever had about us." And the whole room just sort of burst into laughter. But I was trying to make a point, though. It was okay. At some point, we all just have to be honest about what we're doing, and how we're doing, and who we're doing. It's always been very interesting to me how they perceived themselves. And once I got hold of that, I was surprised by their humanity, their basic day-to-day humanity. I realized that's what I had to really dig into. And if you take the Violet Quill interview, which is the three of them, and you take Bram's Eminent Outlaw interview, his book goes from basically Gore Vidal to Edmund White. So those you get a lot of history that's in there, and he is very, very strict about what he includes, excludes. He would explain to me that he needed so many documentations, and he had to have multiple documentations of the same event, or he just dropped it. And I try to then cull that from the people. And John Recchi's interview was absolutely the most interesting because it took the longest to complete, given his then infirmities. And so he was very gracious, which I appreciated. And yeah, it's that contrast of sort of the nice kid in school and then the badass kid,
Right, right. And that was my formation of my teenage concept of what queer life could be. Yes, you could have the romance kind of stuff with the hotsy totsy scenes, but it was kind of over melodramatic, and of course it was set in a different time period, so I had to take that into consideration being a kid of the disco 70s. And then you look at, John Recchi, where it was literally page after page of poetic lust. That's all it was. But I really loved his narrative and the way he would form things. And then when I found out he was Latino like myself, I was like, oh well, I totally get this guy. And but it's those voices from these men predominantly in my growing life that have literally shaped and have been the inspiration for why Vance and I do what we do now with Rote. In fact, we have Roz Russell behind me here in this picture, and that's because she's the patron saint of our podcast. Because, like Auntie Mame, with that collection of wild friends all over the place for her big parties, that's kind of what we're trying to cultivate here is all of these voices. And I love the fact that you've written this, and I'm definitely going to go pick up the companion book, quote unquote, because I really this is the thing I love the most. I love our queer history. I love reading about it. I love consuming it, and it's just so fascinating to me to hear it from their own perspectives. Now, did you plan this because we're in such a divisive era and there's so
No, I
much of
could
what
not.
okay,
No. As I said, I've always done interviews and I've done celebrity interviews and I've liked them because they're sellable. I mean, that's what you do as a freelance, right? You make
right.
10
Hmm.
pitches, you get 9 rejections, and you say it was a good day. I got one yes. Yeah. I
Exactly.
mean that's how that works. And no, I could not have known. And in addition to the two gentlemen, White and Picano, who left, since pulling the book together, I did a review of Equality. What do you think about when you think of Equality by Paul Allen Fahey, who had passed away? Where the purpose there are a couple of bold-faced names that end up on page 6. I think Felice is in there, a couple others, but generally it's people with no public profile. They've just been living the life, and they're friends and allies. And I wanted every level of perception and understanding and experience, not just the big players, not just, and it had to be something and someone that I was comfortable with too. I think you have an obligation to study in some depth people that you're going to be interviewing and
Mm-hmm.
going across. And the other one was Duncan Hanna. When I pitched the interview to the editor at the Brooklyn Rail, his immediate reaction was, "Is he still alive?" He was a young, good-looking, hot as a red coal kid in the Warhol era, right after, and he's going around. Everybody wants him. He's straight. He's as straight as can be. And we recreated that interview at a writers festival, and then sort of added to it. And some of the people that hung out in some of the clubs that he were there in the room. So then they went on and had their own little session.
Love that. Love that. So you've received quite a bit of reviews, and it was again, I'm of an age I actually know all of these publications. Um, So tell me a little bit about how it's been received and what are your thoughts about how people are responding to it?
I could not be happier with the reception. And to be quite honest, as you just mentioned, there was no way I could have known about the time and timing of events. How would I know? I mean, I started in the book with Patrick Merla, who was a great person who advised and helped me shape it. And I signed the contract December of 2023 for the book to come out first quarter of 2025. So a year and a quarter somewhere, in there. And so you're up to your earlobes in detail, detail, detail. You've know certainly firsthand
Mm,
what that is all like. And as things started to become like this is reality, I'm actually going to hold this in my hand and be able to turn pages and read it. Things start happening. Felice dies. Ed dies. Faye had already been gone. Duncan had already been gone. Trump is issuing all of his anti-LGBT executive orders. Everything in the world is going on. So what becomes apparent is that I'm going to have to be talking about this against the backdrop of that history.
right, right.
And one thing that really, really gelled at a speaking engagement I was giving, there were 30 plus people in the room. And someone said, I don't know that the people that are around today that are on the young side of the demographic, when we were all out there doing ACT UP and this and that, and what would be sort of first wave, movement activities that
Mm-hmm.
established some basic civil rights,
Mm-hmm.
that they're up to it. And that I the next morning woke up and wrote it down on a piece of paper, and it'll be in an article coming up, that right now the younger generations grew up into born into environments where there were gay straight alliances in schools,
Right.
books in the library, where there was more rather than less embracement of who they were and the fact that they were not, cisgendered heterosexuals. And that was just a basic idea that queer exists. I'm not talking about all the extensions on our alphabet of self-expression and sexualities. And now that's the rug, all those rugs are being pulled out from underneath.
Yep. Yep.
And it's all of a sudden, I don't know. And I don't, again, I'm not poking my finger in the eye of anybody or in their ear. I know what my experience was, you know what your experience
Mm-hmm.
was, evaluated by what happened to us and what changes were made. I don't know if I were 25 today and grew up in an environment where everything was okay and now it's not.
Right.
I don't have those battle scars.
Right.
And it's not, no. And right now, you can't be looking at adults to make safe space for you. You have to put on your battle cap and you need to go make it yourself.
Right. Right.
That and I don't I worry about that. I a lot.
You, me, and the man on the moon, buddy. I'm telling you. Hmm. Okay. So, is there anything that I failed to ask you about the work that you want people to know?
Well, you had mentioned that it was received so well with reviews, and indeed it was. Consistently, consistently in one way or another, people remarked at the various levels of history and understanding that are there. That honestly was not at the top of my list when I started.
Hmm.
I got the job done, so to speak, in spite of that, what I just expressed to you. But I don't know that I myself fully appreciated the history that I had captured there. And I'm glad that it went the way it did because again, we have no idea what's going to happen day to day. And that has really increased interest in the book because people are looking at it as relevant to the
Hmm.
headline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, are you ready for some get to know you questions?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Well, just before we get started with that, if you're enjoying the content that we're doing here, please like, subscribe, do all the things. If you want to help support us financially, you can do so a number of ways. You can go to our Patreon at patreon.com/rope podcast. There are 3 levels there with different things that you get by subscribing at those levels. Or you can do a one-time donation by going to buymeacoffee.com/rope podcast. Any and everything, all the quarters you find in your pouch that you want to throw our way, we humbly and thankfully are grateful for them. And the last way you can do it is our new way. We have now a YouTube membership for the low cost of 99 cents. That's right, just shy of $1. You can help us keep the lights on because there are costs involved with doing all of this. And for that, you get Albert's and my full reactions to queer media. So, like if we're watching, say, Fried Green Tomatoes, I give you the first minute so you can sync up your copy of the movie with us, and then you can play us like on your phone or iPad or what have you, and listen to our commentary while we're watching it right along with you. And all of that is just for 99 cents. So that's another way you can help us out. So do all of the things. We really appreciate you. This is like Frank's work here. We are trying to become a repository of these voices and make sure that this stuff is kept and protected. So, with that in mind, let's get into the weeds with Frank. Can you name a movie that was better than the book?
What I thought of was Breakfast at Tiffany's, based on Truman Capote's
Mm, mm,
work. Of course, it was Holly Golightly and Paul Yarjak was the character's name. He was the struggling writer that Holly hung out with, played by George Papard. And that went both ways with me. I had fun with that question. Thank you. I said, well, at certain moments, I think the movie was better than the book, but in certain moments, I think the book was better than the movie. And then I teased that in a little bit. And I said, the movie is absolutely wonderful. It's flowing, it's light, it reflects in every possible way. Um, what Capote does in his writing with his words
right.
is that he covers every level of emotion and description, but he doesn't overdo it. And I thought, that's one where you can really see the balance there, where you really want to watch the movie and then read the book, or read the book and then watch the movie, because it goes back and forth so well. You will see in his words, how he struggles, and he says about himself that this is not easy.
Mm,
Even though there's 25 words there in 2 sentences, that took me a half a day to arrive at those words. I rewrote that 75 times until you go, and I think of all that movie and that book is where those two devices came together most completely. So they're really plus a fun movie and a fun book.
excellent. Okay, well, which fictional character would you most like to be friends with?
Boy, you only get to pick one. Oh no, I do. Sometimes I want to be some of the people in Vidal's Kalki.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, where the we got a lot of those circulating around today. The self-proclaimed, I might not be the second coming, but I'm right behind it. I'm right there. I'm right there on the coattails. And there were times when I thought, when Vidal wrote his histories, he always in the back of the book would say, if I could not find it in a letter, a journal, or this, a data document, something that I'm quotable, I didn't make up anything that these people are saying they believed in or thought. I've documented every single bit of that. And if pushed to, I can show you that. And there was even, I think it was in Lincoln, there were 2 instances where he explained where, no, I actually broke that rule because there was no way around doing everything else I wrote about, including everything else I wrote about, and not having an answer to these questions. But historians believe that's probably, I mean, he was that careful, about it.
Okay. Well, what's the most fascinating fact that you know?
That there was so much memory involved in this for me. I wrote the introduction, and I was happy with it. And my editor wrote back and he said, "No, this isn't it. looks like the journalist got a hold of you there and took over. And I said, okay. And I fully expected that. Look, I've never written a book. There is no advice I will not take. Okay.
Uh-huh.
This is what you do, not what I do. Okay. And I benefited a great deal from that. And he said, no, here's what you have to, your introduction is about you. We want to know about you. So I redid it, and now we're talking. And so it was a great experience for me in that way. And one of the things that I discovered was memory. It is accepted in varying degrees, but that you have an event, and then there's the first time you remember it, and then there's the second time you remember it. And what psychologists are explaining is that our second memory is slightly different than the first memory. And the third memory is slightly different than the second, which is slightly different than the first. So now it's 40 years later and you're writing your memoir.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
there's a now current theory that in order to recall something from memory, you have to break it, which is what leads to that recreation because you're
Yes,
recalling it, and that's why the changes over time because we embellish. I mean, God knows Judy Garland was brilliant at embellishing shit that some of which never happened to her, but she knew how that was entertaining. And I think to a great degree, a lot of us, especially the harder times in our, I think we tend to like soften the blow of some of the worst things that happened in our lives. So things mellow over age.
yes. That yeah, we can be. I think as you're explaining, we can be. If it was a good feeling, and we want to have more weekends like that, we can be exuberant about the memories.
Right, right,
And
right.
if it was, a weekend that was just the opposite, oh goodness, and then, and the third time you tell the story, you had 10 stitches, not six.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's the psychological part of the memory. Was it does it evoke a good feeling or bad feeling in you, and that's how you're gonna
right,
deal with
exactly.
it.
All right. Well, what was your favorite subject in school?
History.
Uh, right there
I'm
with
not.
you.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. There wasn't anything about history that didn't fascinate me, and I come from a kind of family that valued that too. In the short end is my paternal grandfather held a couple different elected offices, helped establish the local school district when education became compulsory in Pennsylvania. So he was the tax collector, he was the school director. His oldest son finished a term, school director term. He died while he held it, and then went on to be tax collector. My father went on to be tax collector. So I'm used to stories, the telling of it, the challenging of those stories, because that can be really interesting, and that helped an awful lot as a writer because if you could tell a good story, put in a good punchline, you were valued, you were sought after, you were, hey, he'd be a good one to invite over and sit down with a bottle of homemade wine and some roast chestnuts and just let him talk.
Yeah, yeah. Love that. Love that. Okay. Well, before making a telephone call, do you rehearse what you're going to say?
Almost always, especially when you're doing what we do, I try to anticipate, where to go. If you're going to do an interview and you're going to say, when's the last time you beat your wife? You have to have some sidebar questions. Yeah, I mean, you never really know, and you never. And that's the other. Earlier, you had circled around to explaining to people what it is we're doing. I find I do if I sense they're not familiar with media like you and I may be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that as a disadvantage. I say, let's be fair. And I might sit with you and say, okay, boy, this is what's going to happen. Here's likely who's going to read it. These are the audiences that you're appealing to. So keep that in mind when you are offering. There are no right or wrong answers. And I try to make what's become really normal for you and I. You could wake you and I up in the middle of the night and say, okay, go.
Right.
Yeah, and okay, go interview him. He's here now. Okay,
And you
bye.
formulated on the walk to
Yeah, I'm
wherever we
walking
were
there and
going.
I'm yeah making up questions
Right.
and go. It's not to treat everybody that way. That is not everybody. And some of the best stories I've gotten of sitting in a homeless camp a couple different times
Mm,
is very
mm,
humbling.
mm.
very humbling.
Yeah,
And
I would
I mean,
imagine.
I've been lucky to write about lots of things, not just queer life and AIDS and HIV and all of that stuff, but it's really been all around.
Okay.
And it's been such an experience, a formative experience for me, certainly.
Excellent. All right. Well, what current event or causes are you most passionate about?
Well, almost for sure, since I did those stories, I quietly try to pay attention to what's going on and see, what I can do on the sidelines there. And I started writing for, it's a brand new media outlet. It's called um, LGBTQ Community News.nyc, as in New York City.
Uh-huh.
It's by the founder and publisher Scott Stifler of Chelsea Community News, whom I've written for. And we just launched. I launched some stories on there where I talk to the national organizations. I speak with someone who's out there ground level, Anne Christine Tedeschi, who's a co-founder of Lesbian Avengers, along with Sarah Schulman and many other people who were just as vital to that endeavor, are basically out there every day churning information that people can read and try to figure out where they stand with all the changes that are going on there. That's what we're trying to focus stories. I'm trying to focus stories with the publisher and the editor that are on, the state of queer politics, what is to be done. Okay, we can all describe the hoo-haws. We can all describe. I want to know now specifically, what do we actually do if at 8 o'clock Monday morning I'm to report for duty?
Right.
What do you want individuals to do? What do orgs want to do? Are they willing to cooperate? I'm going to be working on that with Anne, with Scott, and to develop those kind of stories and opportunities for, our dream is, how after, regardless of what you think about the last election, what you think about Harris, what you think, and remember when all of a sudden she's running, and
Right.
within a week, 30,000 people were on a Zoom call like we're doing right
Right. Exactly.
now. That's what we want.
The
That's what we
mobilization.
want.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's what we're going to work. So if you see one of those, probably in the background there, we'll be waving back at you somewhere to try and figure out how do we use advocacy journalism to promote thinking like that and give people opportunities to
Plus,
see where they stand and what they can do.
yeah, plus I think it's a great way to bridge the generations. We come from a generation of activists and people who had to build these networks from the ground up, especially in the highly oppressive, sometimes legally oppressive circumstances. And yet, the children of today, as Billy Porter likes to call the younger generations, the children of today actually are brilliant with the technology portion. So it can be a perfect marriage if it's done right, you know?
We're hoping, yes. It seems like when you put it all on the table, you can scratch your head and go, by gosh, it's all here. We just never baked it into this kind of cake. Now
Yep,
let's see how
yep.
far we can push this. And we're not talking like next week, next month. We're talking like consecutive years of like creating change has gone on now for 20, I forget, many years. There, I talked to Kathy Renna, who gives a good calculation of what they've been up to, and a number of the national organizations there. So I would encourage you. That's LGBTQ Community News.nyc, and look for those stories there, and to follow us. We'd love to have you as a reader.
Absolutely. I'm definitely going to do that myself. Okay, if you could visit anywhere in the world, where would that be?
Paris for sure. And I also, Eastern Europe. I've always been fascinated. I grew up around every Eastern European ethnicity and heard all those languages. Was an altar boy in the Roman Catholic Church. I was an altar boy in a Polish National Church. I at one point dated a woman in college, and immediately after, who belonged to the first Ukrainian Russian Orthodox Church, and the United States, and that's always been very, very special to my heart. Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I took my mom to St. Petersburg. So, my
Oh, you dog.
my little Mexican mother, and this was at the height of when Putin had actually started to open up everything. It was in 2001. It was just before 9/11. And we had the most amazing time. Some of the best stories I have to tell about traveling come from that whole era of going through the first of all, you land in St. Petersburg Airport and you think, oh, it'd be a great, massive metropolitan airport. No, you land in a cow field.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
you
it's
did.
it's
Yeah.
stories like that,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, who, if anyone, was your first celebrity crush?
Hmm. I think it was probably uh, Lucas on The Rifleman, his son.
Oh, okay, okay, I'm seeing it. Okay.
I was just always intrigued. I'm not sure that I always understood that, but when we look back now as adults, especially my era, still in your era, weren't the television portrayals, did they make you want to scratch your head and go, my three sons, the rifleman? What was that one Sky King where his niece lived with him and she
Oh, yeah, yeah,
married?
yeah.
I mean, there were all these. I look back and I think, I don't know about all of that. That's kind of really weird.
Yeah, no, I get
Father
it.
knows bit.
I get it.
Yeah.
For me, it was my teenage years. I happened to see they were doing a retrospective showing of The Sound of Music in theaters, and as a young preteen, I was like looking at Christopher Plummer, not the boys. I was looking at Christopher like, what's he doing? Because I
Yeah.
just thought he was so beautiful in that movie.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's and two, I mean, we I'm born in 1951, so not everybody even had a television in our town by then,
Mm-hmm.
uh, most did. Yeah, I'll leave you with one story. I was a Boy Scout, and we would go swimming on Friday nights, part of the year, over to a YMCA.
Mm-hmm.
And then think about this for a moment. We'd all swim in a big pool naked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that would go on today, huh?
Right.
Nobody thought there was anything
Yeah,
wrong with
no,
no,
nobody
no,
thought
no,
anything. Yep.
nothing wrong. And I would get back, and um, it was 9:30 to 10 o'clock. That was the week that was an English program that was kind of like Saturday Night Live before there was SNL, and then followed by Jack Parr,
Right.
the
Mm-hmm.
talk show host,
Mm-hmm.
who was only the second one after Steve Allen did, the Tonight Show.
Right.
So there was the Jack Parr show. He would have Vidal on as a guest, and my mother would say, Gore Vidal's going to be on Jack Parr tonight. You can stay up late and watch if you don't make noise. And, my sister sometimes struggled with, how come I can't stay up? Um, and you can watch. And I'd watch. That was the week that was. And then we'd, as a family, my older brother or two would be there, and we'd watch Jack Parr, and I'd watch Gore Vidal. And when that came to me as I was writing the introduction, I thought, well, maybe moms always know.
You know, on some level, I think they do. I think they do. So I get it. All right. Well, final question. What's your personal favorite recipe that you make, and are you willing to share it with us?
Basically, a homemade pasta of any kind,
Okay.
a capellini or a small sort of bite-size noodle, some olive oil, some garlic, and some simple salt and pepper. And then from there, I may throw in a little bit of chorizo on the side
There
and
you
some
go.
white or red wine. I love that. I think like you can't ever go wrong when
Right.
you just some basic homemade pasta, some good olive oil, salt, pepper, that's the way to go. An elderly gentleman from Brooklyn once said to me, "I could make an old shoe taste good with just those ingredients." So I always remembered that.
There you go. There you go. From your lips to God's ears. Okay. Well, you made it through our list. Bravo. So, what's got going on next? I mean, are there any publicity stops you're going to do? Any readings that people need to know about? And where's the best place for people to follow you so they can keep up with what you're doing?
I'm very active on Facebook, so if you go there and befriend me, you'll be in the loop. I have also I have some other dates coming up. There is a podcast like we're doing of a little different nature in what we cover, um, with Ivory Tower Boiling Room, that went up last week, and I'm happy to tell you it's got well over 100 views in the first couple days that it was there. So I know we must have covered some interesting territory. And Triversity, which is out of Milford, PA, by a person out of Manhattan, which is broadcast nationally, and that's October 15th from 7 to 7:50. I'll be with Wendy Stewart, who will be interviewing me like you are. And then October 21st, I'm at Penn State University, their Harrisburg campus, which is a 4-year institution, the only one away separate from their main campus, where I will address undergraduate and graduate students on just the lay of the land, what's going on, what are they studying, what are they interested in. We wanted to make it a two-way useful street.
Okay. Okay. Well, you got any final words of wisdom?
Well,
Oh, wait, I have to be smart now.
I have found myself saying, almost as a coping mechanism, I say, every Weimar Republic has its party. I mean, think about that when you go to, okay. While stuff is crumbling and falling down off buildings in flames, there's a big party going on somewhere.
Right. Yep.
And I mean, we call that, what do we call that? Cabaret. We call that, to the mine shaft in our day. Is that, I mean, like I say, with every Weimar, there's a big party. And I think, and I am not suggesting that we party with drugs, or we party with licentious sex, or we party with unsafe sex, or that we do anything stupid. Let's get all that out there. That's my way of saying it's okay to laugh. It's okay to have a good time during these times. The fact that we would deny ourselves that just plays right into the hands of the people who don't want us here to begin with.
That's right.
So we need to take care of each other. It's okay to party. It's okay to play. And it's okay to just put it away for a day or a weekend. It really is okay. You don't have to be wired in, up your behind and in your ears 24/7. You're gonna wear out. That's not healthy. And if our opponents do not have our mental and physical health as their first priority, well, then we should make it our first priority.
Exactly. That part right there. All right. Well, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Frank Pizzoli for being on the show. Frank, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators and our allies. If you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please subscribe so you get all the alerts for new episodes. This show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.ropepodcast.com. Tune in next time for your queer media fix.
Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.